Could you please talk about, I know this is recreational today, but I think you've done more work than almost anyone on all the uses of medical, and even in the United States. So why don't you talk about your breakthrough pioneer work?
Sure. So thanks for having me today. It's an exciting day in Canada. Canadians couldn't be more proud to achieve this milestone. And obviously the eyes of the world are on Canada, as Canada is the first G7 nation to legalize cannabis for adult use. We currently see about 35 countries in the world that have legalized medical cannabis, and I expect it to go from 35 to 40 to 50 to 60 over the next 2 to 3 years. And those countries are using cannabis-based medicine as a replacement for prescription painkillers, opioids. And so that's part of the immediate global opportunity. But after today, we also expect additional countries in the world to legalize cannabis for adult use. That's coming. We know there will be a third country, and I think there'll be a third country somewhere in the world in the next year or so.
Okay, so Brendan, why don't you give us what's your view now it's recreational, that is the size of the market that could be disrupted by cannabis? Not necessarily how big cannabis will be, but how big the total addressable market could be, taking away other things, other areas, everything from edibles to drinks to medical.
I think it can disrupt $150 to $200 billion worth of other industries, and that's pharmaceuticals, that's alcohol, that's functional food and beverage, primarily. And then you'll start to see some cannabinoids used in CPG products, such as cosmetics, lotions, things like that. And so I think that's the big fear. That's why you're seeing the pharmaceutical companies look at the space. That's why you're seeing the alcohol companies invest in the space.
Brendan, Canadian Medical Association put out a statement calling this an uncontrolled experiment in which the profits of producers are squarely pitched against the health of Canadians. How much policy pushback are you hearing at this point?
You know, when we look at Canada, Canadians are definitely in favor of legalizing cannabis for adult use. Most countries in the world that are looking at legalizing for medical use see resounding support for that. It is an experiment, but it's also the end of a 95-year experiment in prohibition that didn't work out so well. And so we're going to see safer products.
What didn't work?
Regulated products. If you look at the United States, you see mass incarceration. You see people using this product, but not using a safe product. And so now Canadians will have access to a safe, regulated, tested, branded product that's taxed and won't contain contaminants like so many of the black market, illicit market products do.
Mr. Kennedy, I have to ask you about the stock price itself, given the rarity of seeing a company's market cap go up 800% in a very short amount of time. Is that a concern of yours? Do you feel as though perhaps it's gotten far ahead of itself in terms of the opportunity? How do you look at it when you look at that incredible appreciation over such a short time?
Yeah, when we were out talking to investors over the last 18 months, the feedback we had from long-only blue-chip U.S.-based firms was that they wanted a company to go public in the U.S. They wanted a company regulated by the SEC. They wanted a company to report in U.S. GAAP financials. And so we went down the path of a NASDAQ IPO. And while we anticipated significant interest in that IPO, and after the IPO, there was a lot more interest than even we had anticipated. And it's just a sign of how this is a real industry. It's a global growth opportunity in a time when there's not a lot of growth. And you're seeing $150 to $200 billion industry transition from a state of prohibition to a state of legalization. I think you'll see 3, 4 companies, a handful of companies, control a significant market share. We think we can be one of those companies. And you'll see multiple companies with $100 billion market caps. And we hope to be one of those companies. And so while we're further and farther along on that growth curve, probably a little faster than we anticipated, clearly investors see that this is an opportunity to invest in a rapidly growing global industry at a time where there just aren't a lot of opportunities like that.
Well, I just want to walk that back a little, Brendan. Several $100 billion companies. I mean, right now we know that Canopy got $4 billion from Constellation, which is going to create a big moat. They have more than 30% of the supply for the dispensaries. But if the whole market, total addressable market, is just a couple over $1 billion, how do you arrive at a figure that is obviously far in excess of what these companies are valued at now?
So I think the total addressable market over the next 5 to 10 years globally is 150 to 200 billion. And I think you'll see a handful of companies dominate part of that industry. Let's say 80%. I think it looks more like beer than any other industry that I can think of. And so if 3 or 4 companies control, 150 billion in terms of market share, you can get to 2 or 3 companies that have a $100 billion market cap, just like the alcohol industry.
Brendan, one of the big stories about the nascent efforts we've had in legalization here in this country, namely in Colorado, some other states, has been the unwillingness of the financial sector to back them with infrastructure. It's an all-cash business, heavy on security. Is it any different in Canada? Will it be any different?
It's completely different. Yes, we use major banks here in Canada. We closed a convertible bond offering last week using Cowen and Bank of America Merrill Lynch and BMO. So you're already seeing major U.S. banks enter this industry. You're seeing major Canadian banks in this industry. And so that's not a problem. We've been operating in Canada for 5 years. We've never accepted a loonie in cash. It's always been using credit cards. And so we don't face those problems here in Canada.
Okay, Brendan, I've been a huge supporter of this. I've had every single one of these companies on, but I want to go back to if there's one company that has $4 billion war chest, you've got a $400 million war chest. Some of these other companies don't really have a lot of cash at all. How can you possibly compete with what is looking like the Amazon of cannabis, which is Canopy?
So I think I have 2 responses to that. One is with the IPO proceeds and the $450 million convert, we have over $500 million in cash, which puts us in a good place. I'm not sure how Canopy deploys $4 billion wisely, or how Constellation deploys $4 billion wisely over the short term. I think that we're comfortable deploying the cash we have. I also think that we're in a really interesting position where every CEO, every chief strategy officer at every other alcohol company and every other functional food and beverage company and every other pharmaceutical company is looking at this industry. They have to figure out how they're going to respond to Constellation. And so that puts us in a very good place in terms of having those conversations.
Okay, so have you been contacted at a $13 billion market cap, which is incredibly large? Have you been contacted by Coca-Cola, by Anheuser-Busch? Have you been contacted by Molson, which wants to be in the business? Which of the major consumer packaged good companies, Altria, which one have you been contacted by? I know that there are many different companies being contacted. I'd like to be able to at least tell me what industry has approached you and said, listen, we want to be your partner.
So, as I'm sure you can appreciate, I can't comment on speculation. I can say that we have talked to Fortune 500 companies from the pharmaceutical industry, from the alcohol industry, from the functional food and beverage industry, from the CPG industry, as well as from the tobacco industry. And those CEOs, those chief strategy officers that are looking at the industry, they wouldn't be doing their job if they weren't talking to companies like ours. They wouldn't be doing their job if they weren't talking to companies like Tilray.
Took 11 months for Constellation to cotton up to Canopy. What kind of company would you like to cotton up to? Because these are very difficult arrangements. Obviously, the cultures are really difficult.
So we've already announced an alliance with the Sandoz division of Novartis, and will continue to expand pharmaceutical agreements into other geographies around the world. I do anticipate additional conversations with alcohol companies and CPG companies. For us, we need to find a company that matches our culture. We need to find a company that can match the the speed at which this industry, the pace, is really different from anything I've ever seen, where we're seeing, we'll go from 35 countries to 60 over the next few years. And so you're seeing a massive market opportunity emerge. And so whoever we partner with, they need to be able to move fast as these new markets develop.
Well, I've got to tell you, this is the day, and I don't mean to rain one bit on the day. I know that your stock at $13 billion. I don't want people to get hurt. As I said to you when you were on Mad Money, I just can't have people get hurt. But you are a leader in this segment, and that's Brendan Kennedy. He's the president and CEO of Tilray Inc. Very speculative name, people. Very speculative name at $13 billion. Thank you so much, Brendan.